Tens of thousands of soldiers died fighting for Canada, far from home on foreign battlefields. Most were never returned to Canadian soil. Some have never been identified. Sarah Lockyer is the Casualty Identification Coordinator and a forensic anthropologist with the Canadian Armed Forces. And she now helps lead a team that's working to remedy that. And Sarah Lockyer joins us now from the nation's capital in Ottawa South. And Sarah, it is great to have you on TVO tonight. I want to just take people, I guess, through some of the background of what you do, and then we'll chat some. So Sheldon, if you would, let's bring this graphic up to start with. The Canadian Armed Forces Casualty Identification Program began in 2007. More than 27,000 Canadian soldiers have no known graves. From the First World War, 20,000 still unaccounted for. From the Second World War, 7,000 still unaccounted for. And in the Korean conflict, as they call it, but yes, it was a war, 16 still unaccounted for. The Casualty Identification Program has identified the human remains of 32 Canadian soldiers, and the team is currently trying to identify 42 sets of remains and 42 graves marked as unknown soldiers. This is, I'm sure, utterly fascinating, but also very important work, and it's great that you've joined us tonight on this day in particular to remember this. Sheldon, why don't we bring this picture up right now? Here's a picture of unearthing of Canadian soldiers' remains in Belgium. Can you just, Sarah, describe what we're seeing here and tell us how remains are usually discovered in the first place?
Typically, remains are discovered because of farming activity or construction work. And many times when construction work is being planned, there has to be a munitions clearing process because there's quite a bit of unexploded ordnance, especially in France and in Belgium. But in that particular photo, it was a circumstance where we had irrefutable evidence where the remains of a Canadian soldier was resting. We had found partial remains, and we were pretty confident we would be able to collect the rest. And my predecessor was able to go overseas and collaborate with a Belgian archaeology firm, and that's what you see in that photograph. It is that process of recovering those remains.
So you recovered the remains, and were you actually, at the end of the day, able to identify who that was?
Yes, we were. And with the help of the Canadian Forces Forensic Odontology Response Team, the forensic dentist, they were able to compare his dental information and his personnel file to confirm his identification.
And do you know whether there was any family that you could actually repatriate those remains to?
Yes, we were able to contact the families, but the remains are not repatriated to Canada. They are buried in the closest appropriate cemetery to where they fell. So this particular soldier, Private Kenneth Donald Duncanson, was buried in Adigem War Cemetery in Belgium, and his family was there in attendance.
And they are content to have his eternal resting place be the place where he gave his life for his country.
Correct. And it's the policy that we use for any Canadian soldier, airman, or Navy personnel who died in combat before 1970. They are buried in the closest appropriate cemetery to where they fell, which is what other Commonwealth nations also abide by through this concept of equality in death. So they will be buried with their comrades overseas where they fell.
Okay, let's bring up, Sheldon, if you would, let's bring up the second picture here. And why don't you just describe for us what it is that we're seeing here?
This here is a shoulder title from the 73rd Royal Highlanders of Canada. And this was an artifact that was found with the remains of Sergeant Shaughnessy from the First World War, who died at the Battle of Hill 70. And this key piece of information was able to allow us to narrow down the list of potential candidates quite significantly to be able to identify the remains of Sergeant Shaughnessy.
Well, you've anticipated my next question because I presume, hundreds, if not thousands of people wore that shoulder title. So how would you be able to narrow it down to just that one person?
Well, for this particular case, my colleagues who are historians was able to take the exact location where the remains were discovered, and they were able to determine that it was in fact the 13th Battalion who was active in that area. So why did we find a shoulder title from the 73rd Royal Highlanders in an area where only the 13th Battalion was active? Well, through further research, we found out that the 73rd was disbanded, and 7 from the 73rd had been sent to the 13th Battalion. So then that gave us a much smaller list just based on that one piece of information to be able to track where these soldiers had gone through and which regiment they had been a part of.
I see. Now, that pretty clearly, when you find something like that, that pretty clearly identifies the soldier as having fought for Canada. What other artifacts might you find that would allow you to conclude categorically that's a Canadian soldier and not someone from another country?
Quite often we find admittedly Commonwealth equipment. So there's no national identifiers. You'll find things like general service buttons, or the type of equipment that they receive doesn't have any national identifiers on it. But many times we'll find buttons with Canada on it. We'll find some cap badges that has the regimental insignia on it, and other things like that. And rarely, but sometimes it happens, we will find an identification disc, or what we know today as a dog tag.
Gotcha. And that's what you just described there?
Yes, exactly. And that's the identification disc that was found with Sergeant Shaughnessy. But what's important to remember during the First World War is that the Canadians were issued an identification disc made out of a leather type cardboard material that actually decomposes. So those metal identification discs that are found, those are things that the soldiers paid for them to get created. So it's not something that was standard issue at the time. So we don't find them very frequently.
Interesting. Now, I would not have thought that more than 100 years ago there would be great dental records kept of the soldiers before they went overseas to fight. And yet you told us earlier you do some sort of teeth / enamel matching up. So how does all that work?
Well, there are some limitations with the dental records because for whatever reason, the dental records of the soldiers who died during the First World War are not in the personnel file. They are in the files of those who survived. So at some point, somebody decided that that information wasn't useful anymore for the soldiers who died during the First World War. However, for those who died during the Second World War, the dental records are in the personnel files, and I've seen x-rays as well in the personnel files from time to time. So using the dental analysis and being able to engage with the Canadian Forces Forensic Odontology Response Team can only really happen for Second World War cases and those from the Korean conflict.
I get you. But it sounds like, just from the numbers we gave off the top, that most of your work is focusing on First World War vets. Is that right?
It is. That is correct. They are the vast majority of the cases that I'm working on. At this time, I only have 2 from the Second World War, and everything else is from the First. So.
And where the 2 from the Second World War, where would they be?
Right now, we're looking at something in the Germany, and the other case, I believe, is in the Netherlands.
Gotcha. Now, I'm going to assume here that when you find the remains, let's say, of skeletal remains, I mean, these are people who came to their demise, I have to assume, in most of them, in incredibly violent circumstances. So what are you actually finding?
Well, it all depends on a case-by-case basis, but yes, it is skeletal remains. So there's no more organs or skin or anything like that. And it depends on a number of different circumstances, but sometimes we'll find a skeleton that's about 80% or more complete, or sometimes we'll find instances where we have less than 25% of the skeleton. So it depends on a number of different circumstances, what happened directly after the war, if there's been any activity on that soil since then, usually yes. And it all depends on how well they were preserved as well in the soil.
But would it be the case that if you've only found 25% of a skeletal remain, it's because that soldier was blown up?
I mean, we can only speculate at this point. There isn't that much detailed information in the personnel files, especially from the First World War. So it's not really necessarily something that I spend too much time trying to determine exactly how they died, because we know that they died during the war.
Right. How much does DNA matching help you do what you do?
DNA is a great tool. It is something that we use in about 99% of our cases. Almost all of them go through DNA analysis. However, it's not as easy as what people see on television through shows like CSI and things like that. There can be some complications with DNA analysis, but it is definitely a great tool that we utilize very, very often to confirm an identification.
Okay, let's bring up, Sheldon, if you would, let's bring up this picture at the top of page 4 here. And this is, I gather, one of your more recent discoveries, Sarah. Who's the young man on the left in this picture?
The young man on the left is Private John Lambert from the Royal Newfoundland Regiment. And we were able to confirm his identification and announce it to the public in December of 2020.
And what was it that you announced?
That we had confirmed his identification. His remains had been discovered through an archaeological excavation that was happening in Belgium. And that once COVID allowed us to do so, that he would be getting a full military burial in a cemetery in Belgium. And he would be buried with his name, by his regiment, and in the presence of family.
That fellow looks awfully young. How old was he?
He died when he was 17 years old.
He volunteered to go fight 100 years ago at the age of 17.
16, actually, when he enlisted. He lied about his age, and he was 16 years old and then died at the age of 17.
My goodness. You know, I don't want to be overly maudlin about this, but that's, I don't know, how does that hit you, finding the remains of somebody who's only 17 years old?
It was a bit jarring because it was immediately evident to me when I was looking at his remains that he was very young, that he was still growing, and he was definitely in adolescence. So that was immediately evident to me. And then when the families sent us his photograph, that's when it was even more apparent of just how young he was. And you think back at what I was doing at 16, 17 years old, and it's just not comparable of being able to think about going to war at that young an age.
And he did have family members who were able to go overseas and participate in a final ceremony, is that right?
Well, Private Lambert has not been buried yet. Because of the situations we find ourselves in with the COVID-19 pandemic, we've had to delay his burial, and we're hoping that we'll be able to have that happen in 2022.
Gotcha. Do you know that he has family members who are still around and know about this information?
Yes.
He does?
Yes, absolutely, yes. And the family was officially notified by current members of the Royal Newfoundland Regiment, and I know that quite a few of them are hoping to be able to make their way over to Belgium to be there that day.
How many of these ceremonies / funerals have you personally been able to attend?
I think I'm about 10 now, is that I've been able to attend.
What's it like?
It's quite emotional. Through the entire process of going through the investigation, I try as much as possible not to get too emotional about the process. But then we get to the ceremonies. I speak with the soldiers from the regiment who are there to bury one of their own. I get to speak to the families and interact with them and get an understanding of what this means for them. And then when the burial actually occurs, it's the emotion can't really be described. It's a bizarre thing where it's quite of a happy occasion because he's been identified, his name and his face has been returned to them. But at the same time, with the solemn recognition of why he died and what he died for, kind of all come together to make a rather special and emotional ceremony. Now,
the First World War vets obviously would have died 100 years ago, and that means you're dealing with great-grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren, great nieces and nephews, that kind of thing. Is there still a connection there?
Yes. Now, it's quite rare to have grandchildren because many of them did not have children before they died. But many times it can be, we had one family member who was a nephew. He was a direct nephew of the soldier who had died. But other times it's great nephews, great nieces. Sometimes they're quite a bit removed as well. But I find that the majority of the time, there still very much is that connection where the family tell me stories of how the memory of that service member had been told by a number of different family members, and it was kept alive within their family.
Yeah, you would think there would be family stories and lore that would have gone down through the years, but is it ever, I don't know if this is an inappropriate question, but is it ever odd to sort of be reunited with somebody you clearly never met, and in some cases maybe, you know, obviously didn't know, but you may be a very distant relative at this point.
Right. Well, I can't speak on behalf of the families as to what they feel, but it's quite evident that even though they may not have met them, there's still a connection there, and there's still an aspect of remembrance and of recognizing their sacrifice, which can still very much hold that emotional component to the process.
Sarah, just finally, I find that when I have talked over the years to people who do the kind of thing that you are involved in right now, they don't do it because they want to do it or like to do it. They do it because they need to do it. They have to do it. They feel this is a mission for them. So tell me what's the motivation for you to do this?
For me personally, as a forensic anthropologist, the points or my goal that I always come back to is to return their identity to them. They died for their country. They were lost, some of them over 100 years. And I think it's the least we can do, because when you interact with people, usually the first piece of information you share about yourself is your name. And to me, thinking that some of these men have been nameless and faceless for over a century, that's not right. So if I can do my small part and return their name and their face to them, then it makes for quite a privilege and an honor to be able to do that for them and for their families as well.
And I presume you've talked to today's Canadian Forces soldiers. What do they think about the work you're doing?
Correct. Actually, many of my colleagues are Canadian Armed Forces members, and for them, they very much feel that this perpetuates the notion and the knowledge for them that if something were to happen to them today, that there is somebody within the Canadian Armed Forces who will be working towards identifying their remains so that they can be properly buried with their name. So for them, it's a very emotional and important aspect of the work and why it's important.
And we're delighted that you were able to come and be on TVO tonight and tell our viewers and listeners all about this. Such important work. Sarah Lockyer, Casualty Identification Coordinator and a forensic anthropologist with the Canadian Armed Forces. Thanks so much, Sarah.
Thank you so much.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.